his disciples, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we shall come to him and make our home with him. Those who do not love me do not keep my words, and my word is not my own. It is the word of the one who sent me. I have said these things to you while still with you, but the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything, and remind you of all I have said to you. Peace I bequeath to you, my own peace I give you, a peace the world cannot give. This is my gift to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. You heard me say, I am going away and shall return. If you loved me, you would have been glad to know that I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. I have told you this now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you may believe." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I've actually got two homilies today. One's about the Council of Jerusalem from the first reading, the Acts of the Apostles, and the other one's about the Gospel. Who wants to hear about the Acts of the Apostles in the early church? Hands up. Okay. Who wants to hear about the Gospel? 3. Sorry, you're outnumbered, guys. Anyway, I usually preach about the Gospel, so I think it's a nice change anyway to have a little bit from the Acts of the Apostles of the first reading. But let's hear those words again that we heard. "Some men came down from Judea and told the brothers, 'Unless you have yourselves circumcised in the tradition of Moses, you cannot be saved.'" So circumcision was the debate, at least what we might say the catalyst. It began the reaction. But in fact, it wasn't just circumcision. This was the big issue, yes, but it was actually about Judaism in general and the law of Moses. So everything that's contained in the 5 books of the Old Testament, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, or Numbers and Deuteronomy. And then all the teachings in the Psalms and the teachings of the prophets. So basically, what of the Jewish religion are we going to abide by if we are going to be Christians and follow Jesus? This was no problem, of course, for the Jews who had converted to Catholicism, Christianity, but it was a problem for the Gentiles who had converted to Christianity. Now, the Gentiles, or the pagans, were not non-believers in God. Like, they weren't atheists. Sometimes we confuse a pagan for an atheist. You might say, "Oh, you're a pagan," as in you don't believe in anything. That's not what a pagan is. A pagan is actually a believer in a false god. So I believe in a statue. I believe in 3 gods, 15 gods, whatever. That's paganism. So it's believing in a false god, not in the true God. So the Gentiles, or the pagans who are coming over to Christianity, they were faced with the question, well, I believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, but do I have to believe all the other Jewish stuff? And that's what the debate was about. And circumcision was right there in the middle of it, and very important, because it was a command that God had given to Abraham centuries before, and this was going to be the mark for every male of that religion. After the long debate, they boiled it down, saying, no, we are not going to basically burden the Gentiles with a whole lot of unnecessary things. We're going to boil it down to 4. And here are the 4. Where are they again? We're not going to settle them, because we haven't been able to keep up a whole lot of these things of the Jewish religion ourselves. And so we're saying it's not fair to ask the Gentiles to do the same. So the essentials are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from fornication. So the fornication is not just the sexual act, it's actually including all things to do with false marriages, so adultery and leaving your spouse behind and divorce and all of that, okay, and then marrying another. So that included all of that under fornication. But the other three requirements, abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from the meat of strangled animals, and from blood, they may seem a little bit strange to us. Abstaining from the meat sacrificed to idols, well, I guess we can see how, okay, this meat has now been sacrificed to the idol, and so therefore it's polluted. It's somehow been tarnished in some way, and therefore it wouldn't be right for me to eat this. But, as St. Paul was to say later on, even this teaching, we no longer hold on to it, because we don't have, I'll tell you what happened. In Corinth, which was basically a Gentile community of Catholic Christians, it was a Greek city in the early church, and there weren't many Jews there. So, in the marketplace, you had two kinds of meat for sale. You go for a top side or some, lamb cutlets or something. You had the price that was of the meat sacrificed to idols, and then you had the price for the meat that hadn't been sacrificed to idols. So, and the Catholic Christians would buy from the other meat, the cheaper discounted rate, whereas the Jews would buy the more expensive meat because they weren't allowed to eat the meat that was sacrificed to idols. St. Paul had said to them, look, idols don't exist. They're just statues. They're not real gods. They're empty. So, just make sure you say grace for it with thanksgiving, and then you can eat the meat. No problem. And that's what they used to do. But for those in Jerusalem, if you had been a practicing Jew, faithful for many years, and then you meet Jesus Christ, and you realize, wow, a whole lot of those things we no longer need to do. Do you think it would be an easy shift? I don't think so. Unless you maybe never liked to do it in the first place, then it would be an easy shift. But if it was something that you actually hung on to, then it's deeply rooted within you. So you're not going to get rid of it so easily. And that's why they retained it. Eventually, as I said, St. Paul did away with his teaching and said, look, you know what? This is not sacrificed to anything. Just make sure you thank God for it, because ultimately all things are a gift from God. But also St. Paul, showing his own sensitivity of conscience, he says, but if it's going to cause a brother to fall into sin and scandalize him, I will never eat meat again. If it's going to cause the scandal of somebody else. So St. Paul isn't saying, just do these things without paying attention to what you're causing around you. You've also got to be sensitive, because the law of love for our neighbour is higher than the law of just eating or not eating meat sacrificed to idols, these statues. So that's the first one. Well, the second one rather, the fornication we've already discussed. The other two, very quickly, the meat of strangled animals and blood, drinking the blood. Now, I don't know too many people who actually like drinking the blood of animals, but they obviously must have done it, or else they would not have worried about it. So it must have been a practice in those days. And you might think, well, the meat of strangled animals, what's wrong with that? We tend to bleed our animals. But a meat of strangled animals meant that the blood is still inside the animal. Okay, so what's so wrong about this? Well, for the Hebrew mind, the blood was the life force of the creature. So whether it's a lamb or an ox or a cow or a rabbit or whatever, the blood is inside it. Therefore, the life force is somehow still inside the animal. I know that the biology obviously is wrong and it's mistaken. We don't believe that, right, ourselves. But they did. So the idea was that if I ate the meat of a strangled animal, I'm also going to ingest the blood of that animal, which means I'm going to take into myself the life force of that animal. If you take inside of you the life force of the animal, then you animalize yourself. You make yourself something of that animal. That's the idea why the prohibition. And if you drank the straight blood of that animal, then you took on the life of that animal more directly. That's why you are to abstain from it. But then, there's someone else that we know who tells us, eat my body and drink my blood, don't we? Please nod. Yeah, that's right, exactly. Because we do. Jesus Christ tells us, eat my body and drink my blood. Why? Because he wants his life force to take over us and divinize us and make us holy. So these 4 prohibitions were the conclusions of the Council of Jerusalem, which was not as big as like a Vatican II or a Vatican I, but it was the first council ever held in the church. It was a smaller council, and the bigger councils are known as the Ecumenical and General Councils, and they bind the whole church. But these smaller ones are still important because they tell us of the issues that were going on at that time. For us, what this means in practice is that whenever there is a misunderstanding or a controversy in the church, then we have a council together. Like next year, for instance, we've got a plenary council in Australia. And if you think that's all going to be a very peaceful and calm decision-making process, then I'm sorry to say, but you're not living in the same planet that we're all living in. Because it will not be a calm and peaceful process. There will be opposing views there, and some will be very faithful to the church's teachings, and others will not be. And there will be battles, as there were in all of these councils. It will not be a simple affair. And there will be some views that will be clearly, as I said, not be in line with the church, and others will be, and they will be the ones that will go forward and shape the teachings and the culture of the church life in Australia. So stay tuned. But this is the way the church historically resolves the controversies that are existing within it. And this happened after Vatican II. It was all sort of supposedly peaceful. But after the first session, when the bishops from all over the world thought the Vatican Curia was trying to impose their own teachings upon them, they just all walked out. They said, we're either all in this together or we're not. It's either going to be a real council or we're not. And sure enough, then some beautiful documents came out of the Second Vatican Councils. So, as faithful Catholic Christians, we turn our minds and hearts and listen to the church teaching us through her conciliar teachings. And through this, we will experience and see the Holy Spirit working there, even though there have been and will be elements that are not from the Holy Spirit, but in the end the Holy Spirit wins and purifies the church from wrong teachings and sets afresh before us the true teachings of Christ, and these are the ones that we must follow, and these are the ones that will be made clear in the documents that follow.